Hi, this is Michael Red. I am the author and founder of Leadership Zen. This is now the fourth, and I'd like to welcome you to it. It's the fourth introductory video that we've produced over the last few days. Really just trying to give you a sense of exactly what Leadership Zen is, what the foundations are, and how I believe that this is something that can help you from a personal change standpoint. So when most people take a look at something called Leadership Zen, we're thinking about it being a leadership development program, and it is. However, it's not a traditional business leadership program because it really is a program and a practice, a philosophy and a practice of personal transformation. So if we take a look at our lives and recognize that we want to be more effective in the things that we do professionally or in the community, when we want to be better in our relationships with our partners, our spouses, our children, family, and friends, or when we just want to be able to take a look at the world a little different, maybe see it with a little bit of a brighter light than we did yesterday. That's what Leadership Zen is. It's a bigger concept than really business leadership, and it's a bigger concept than self-help. That's why I don't really label it as either one, though there might be a tag out there someplace, at least drawing you to the concept. This is really about you. And if you think about our tagline, which is changing the world one life at a time, we want that first life to be yours. We want that life to be yours. So in the first three videos, the first one was sort of an introduction into who I am and what I'm about and how Leadership Zen came into being over the last couple of decades. Secondly, the second video was really about what is Leadership Zen, which is one of those fundamental questions that when you have a name like Leadership Zen, it just kind of comes up every once in a while, so I wanted to make sure that we answered that. The third video was about one of the two foundations, which was humanism, really a philosophy that talks about how you, the individual, are the biggest catalyst in terms of causing change. So this fourth video, which will be the last before we get to the bigger concepts, the things that actually help you through Leadership Zen, is about the second foundation, and that's called positive psychology. So let's kind of put all this in perspective. We've got the nature and importance of humanism behind us. So we know, if you've seen the other videos, that number one, it puts the individual central to everything. But second of all, it helps us to understand that we have a responsibility not only to ourselves to be as good as we can be, but also to others to make sure that humanity and the planet and everything else, it's almost an ethical premise that says that we have to do good in the world, which isn't too unlike other philosophies or religions or other things in the world. Humanism is a philosophy that's it dates before anybody actually knows where it came from, but it kind of points us in that direction, and that is foundation or pillar one of Leadership Zen. Pillar two is this notion of positive psychology. And this concept really helps us to understand just how we anchor our minds and our thinking in such a way to provide a strong foundation for growth and development. It is also the first step in changing how we think so we can eventually transform how we act. And that is ultimately the premise of Leadership Zen, is that if we change the way that we view the world and change the way we think about events that happen around us, then we can transform how we act and eventually the impact and influence that we have on the world around us. Now, when we think about traditional psychology, we tend to conjure up images of treating some sort of defect or mental illness, much like the approach of conventional medicine. The goal is really to get the patient back to normal. Through a combination of cognitive and behavioral therapies, medications, and alternative approaches, the practitioner seeks to cure or treat the illness so that it mitigates the effect on the patient. Now, while recognizing that there are definitely ailments that affect the brain and can impact the quality of a patient's life, thus requiring this approach really, it wasn't always this way. Now, a lot of people don't know that prior to World War II, there was at least some emphasis placed on identifying things that improved lives and performance in a more general sense, without the underlying disorder to drive it. That focus changed after the war because the number of patients with trauma skyrocketed in its wake. So it cemented the field's focus on treating psychological disorders. Now, I've heard it said, and the statistic is probably close, whether it's exact or not, it's probably close, that for almost over a century, for every 20 clinical research studies done in the field, only one dealt with positivity. So 20 research studies, all 19 of them are on how to fix something wrong. Only one was how to make things better from where we stand today. That certainly demonstrates a bent towards fixing someone. The traditional psychologist or psychiatrist approach starts from the assumption that something is wrong. Sure, plenty of people seek counseling as an upgrade to their current circumstances. We often call that coaching. But by and large, the field seeks to find a cause for negativity. It's rooted in the science's Bible, known as the DSM, or Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. The quest, rather than trying to uncover the secrets to leading a better life for its own sake, seeks to diagnose and return to the whole question of normalcy. But problems can arise when trying to define baseline normal. What is normal, really? Normal is a perspective, where you come from. Besides, when you're seeking a transformation, and I assume that if you're watching this or reading the books or reading the blog, you've already made a decision that you're looking for that kind of transformation for whatever your reasons are for wanting to get there. But when we're seeking that transformation, we definitely want to shoot just a little higher than the baseline, right? Traditional approaches in this field just simply don't work. So enter positive psychology, which takes a decidedly opposite approach and can roughly be defined as the scientific study of what makes life worth living, or most worth living. In other words, this unique branch of psychology seeks to emphasize those things that lead to a meaningful and fulfilling life. It's literally focused on reinforcing strengths on the way to the good life. So that's known as eudaimonia or flourishing. Positive psychology study factors that lead to greater life satisfaction, well-being, and self-confidence, all of which are the hallmarks of Leadership Zen and the model of good leadership in general. Now, the field is relatively new. Circa, call it 1998, when it was chosen by the head of the APA, or the American Psychological Association, by a guy by the name of Martin Seligman. He's a PhD. He was the head of the APA, and he chose it to be the central theme of his administration, so to speak. Now, while Seligman is often seen as the face of the positive psychology movement, credit is due to a whole bunch of others, many who preceded him. William James and Abraham Maslow, and you might know Maslow because of the hierarchy of needs, they were among the first to recognize that a diagnostic-only approach to psychology was probably not really fulfilling the promise of the field. They wanted to explore a more constructive and positive direction. So, like always, I want to make sure that people get credit where credit's due, and honest answer, I'm probably missing a few people, but let's just say that the movement of positive psychology probably predates the adoption of positive psychology. So it's a relatively important piece to understand. It's always been out there, but it hasn't necessarily been a part of traditional modalities or traditional therapies. So let's get back to Seligman. What he's known for outside of bringing positive psychology to the forefront was in developing a theory that he called PERMA, which is literally P-E-R-M-A. It identified 5 foundations for a life that flourishes. So the first is positive emotions. The second is engagement. The third is relationships. The fourth is meaning. And the fifth is accomplishments. Now, these 5 foundations are crucial elements of Leadership Zen in that they serve as the way we need to think about our needs when trying to transform our lives. Positive emotions form the basis of our approach to leadership, fulfillment, and holistic wellness. Far from the ideas brought forth in the power of positive thinking, which many people misinterpret as to mean that if you simply believe good things will happen to you, then they will happen to you. Or that has its detractors. I do believe in the idea of creating positive energy around you, but at the same time, it takes a little bit more purpose and meaning to actually drive the outcomes that you want to. And that is really what Leadership Zen tries to do. We acknowledge that negative emotions are a part of life, and we actually encourage you to accept them and to learn how to deal with them. That's a piece of emotional intelligence and a really good characteristic of somebody who's a great leader, either organizationally or personally. The key is that when you dwell on negative emotions or you use them as your center theme for why things aren't happening, that can really be detrimental to your mental and emotional health. So instead, what Leadership Zen tries to do is we try to teach people to focus on a variety of affirmative mindsets, including happiness, joy, self-confidence, pride, and excitement, in order to fight against the inevitable negativity that affects us all. We seek to empower people to overcome the negativity in their lives, helping to alleviate the self-imposed victimization that makes them feel powerless to achieve their goals. Engagement refers to one's ability and willingness to participate in things that they like to do, and therefore actively engages the idea of one's interests. When we engage, we can feel in the zone with a high degree of focus and energy that can contribute to positive emotions overall. There's a Hungarian psychologist, and I'm not even going to promise or pretend that I can pronounce his last name. My apologies. It's Mihaly, and I can't pronounce the last name. But he's worked very closely with Seligman. So if you look up positive psychology and Seligman, you'll see his contribution to the work. So he's one of those people that at the beginning when I was giving credit, I didn't give him credit there because I knew we would give it later. But when we're talking about being in this zone, he described this or referred to this as flow, stating that people are at their happiest and at their best when they are completely absorbed by the activity that they are engaged in. It represents high skill and high challenge level. And when done correctly, it avoids a state of apathy contrary to our goal of positivity. Now, relationships, that's the R in the PERMA model, are critical in any humanistic approach, which both Leadership Zen and the field of positive psychology represent. Human beings by nature are social animals, and having good, strong relationships can be critical in reinforcing the things that bring happiness to our lives. These include friends, family, spouses, and partners, as well as casual social interaction with the outside world. They provide support when things go sideways, but they also reinforce affirmative events and actions that can support a positive lifestyle. A key component of the Leadership Zen philosophy emphasizes cultivating and nurturing relationships with a variety of people in our lives and throughout our lives. Now, earlier I mentioned Abraham Maslow. He's got a very famous theory out there. You might have heard of it. It's called the hierarchy of needs. And that tells us that self-actualization is a key component in human satisfaction. In the PERMA model, that is encompassed by the word meaning, or a sense of purpose in our lives, which is very necessary to us being fulfilled. We all seek to understand why things happen around us. When we watch the news or we talk to friends, or even when we consider the nature of the cosmos. There is no bigger why than the one that explains our own existence and what we're meant to achieve. That understanding can be a heavy contributor to personal and professional fulfillment. So finally, the PERMA model suggests that our accomplishments can feed our positive psychology. While some critics and even the original theorists suggest that sometimes they don't, our belief is that when those accomplishments are led by other factors, such as purpose or meaning or the other elements of the PERMA model, they can significantly contribute to positive emotions. And when I talk about people not necessarily, or accomplishments not necessarily driving that fulfillment or that sense of well-being or that sense of yes, I've done something, it is entirely plausible that as human beings we get wired to the sense that, okay, I've accomplished this and now I'm driving myself to accomplish the next thing. So we don't actually enjoy the moment of when we've accomplished something because our egos are driving us to get to that next place. That's not necessarily what we're promoting, quite frankly. That's not what Leadership Zen is all about. It's about taking pride, yes, certainly, but measured pride in a sense of accomplishment, because it is part of that whole self-actualization piece that Maslow has presented and what's largely been accepted throughout the psychological community for decades. So back to Leadership Zen and the PERMA model. We wholly embrace the PERMA model. It is simpler than Maslow's hierarchy, although I admit I'm still a fan. It has its own value when thinking about personal fulfillment, but there's something simpler and easier to grasp with respect to the PERMA model. Maslow's hierarchy is a little broader than what we're looking for in terms of describing it. PERMA provides a simple framework for developing strategies to cause real change in ourselves and forms an excellent reference for leading others by creating an understanding of them as individuals. And again, heavily central to our theory is understanding that individuals are central to causing change. So, a few important considerations as you digest this model. First, that each one in its own way does contribute to overall wellness and well-being, as well as your performance. So, you'll hear us talk a lot, or you hear me talk. We'll invite other speakers later, but you'll hear me talk about the idea of wanting to be both fulfilled and having this sense of well-being. Well, that's all about loving life, quite frankly, and feeling fulfilled and not allowing negativity to govern what goes on out there. I also think that that has a direct correlation to your performance, whether it's at work or at home or whatever. If you're not fulfilled on your own, and it's sort of a play on the whole take care of yourself first because you can't take care of anybody else unless you do, I believe that it's important that you have that sense of well-being and wellness in order to be effective at the other things that you want to do. Because when we strive for and achieve this balance, it tends to make us more effective in the roles that we play every day. External factors are not the leading driver for why we seek to work on these areas. We do so actually in order to achieve purpose and meaning. Finally, each one of these PERMA model attributes stands on its own merits. None are defined or based on the other four. These foundations of positive psychology serve as the motivational basis for the philosophy and the practice of Leadership Zen, and they feed what we call the 6 commitments, which is really the foundations we use to develop new, strong habits that can change lives, starting with your own. So that really concludes the 4-episode introduction to Leadership Zen, and I hope over these 4 episodes you've not only gotten a sense of exactly what it is that I've tried to create with this philosophy and this practice, but also how it can help affect your life. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do is sort of process that a little bit, because our egos oftentimes will not allow us to even admit that something isn't right with our lives. But the fact is, we all have moments where we're not performing at our best. We all have issues within our social circles and with our spouses and our families and whatnot, where things don't go the right way. And certainly we all have moments or significant moments of negativity that really hamper what we can do in the world. The idea is that none of those things are going to go away, but we can actually increase our level of control over it by following the principles and creating habits that are included within Leadership Zen. That has certainly been my goal for the last 2 decades. It's become the goal of others, and I'm hoping once you reflect upon what we're talking about, that it can also become one of your goals as well. Now, real quick, where do we go from here? One thing I can tell you is that I want to do a lot less reading from a script and a lot more free flow discussion because I love dialogue. So what we're going to do is we're going to be talking about some of the concepts that make up Leadership Zen. It's not going to be the clinical architecture of exactly how it works, but really talking about how the theory behind some of the elements of Leadership Zen translate into practice and address real-world issues that you have, whether it's productivity or an inability to connect effectively with other people, or just generally a lack of satisfaction of where you are, or a desire to increase your satisfaction with where you want to be. We're going to talk about authenticity, we're going to talk about curiosity, and we're going to talk about vision, among other things. The idea is that when I wrote Leadership Zen, I wanted to create something that was as individual and as personal as it can be. Because, again, we want to cause some change in the world, but we want to do it through people that want to change themselves. So again, I'm Michael Redd. I am the author and the founder of Leadership Zen. I thank you very much for being a part of these last 4, and I look forward to you joining us on this journey. Take care now.